Well, hello there. All right. Welcome back to Introduction to Cultural Anthropology. We're continuing our discussion on um, inequality and how do we as anthropologists sort of analyze this, right? How do we look at how different societies, including our own, deal with these sort of ideas of poverty? Um, so let's talk about that. So we draw upon as many things as we possibly can to analyze this subject. This includes other scientist theories, um, some of which might have become outdated, but they still provide a lot of insight into what's going on today. We conduct field work, right, to try and understand how people live and where they fit into that system. So going out and talking to folks, making observations, doing the field work, mapping, trying to figure it out. Why is this community in a state of poverty? What are the things that they're facing? What is their education level? All of these different things by actually going out and living and working within that community. And then we look at the different systems that have been created and see what kind of models fit, right? We might have one particular model that works within rural communities. Um, and, does that same system fit, let's say, with American rural communities to rural communities in Central Africa, right? Are they experiencing the same thing? Probably to some degree, yes, and some degree, no. There's going to be different things that are going to work. But if you take a model from like American rural communities and transplant it into rural communities in Europe, you're more likely to find more similarities. So, understanding how those different models might be affected by similar or different cultures along with access to different resources, different ideologies, different religions, right? All of those things are going to have an impact. So let's talk about a few different approaches to how we see poverty and different opinions about that. So we might look at Karl Marx. Marx has a big sort of footprint within American ideology when it comes to understanding wealth. Um, Marx would say that there are two classes, and this is one of the reasons why Marx doesn't fit totally into our modern look because we have multiple class systems, but it still has some relevance. Looking at the bourgeoisie or the proletariat, the capitalist and the workers, the owners and the suppliers, right? So they would, if we were to look at Marx and use some of his ideas, uh, we would look at how the owners would treat and control the lives of the workers, right? Would look at their level of skill and their access to resources. So this is important even today to understand the difference between um, the sort of like upper management and labor, right? Who's making more money? What kind of resources do they have? How are they engaging with the workers? Who do they hire based on education, experience, that kind of stuff? And then how are they treated, right? What kind of wages are they giving? This helps us to understand the power between these two different classes, right? Who has control over whose time, right? If you are the owner of a business, do you have the capability of designing your own work schedule? Um, do you spend more time working? Can you just get up and leave in the middle of the day when everyone else, if you were to leave in the middle of your shift, you might get fired for doing so, right? What kind of privileges might you have um, that other people within that company might not have? Um, and again, this is a little bit more of an outdated system because globalization has really changed since the time of Mark, and the dynamics within power has really changed because of the emergence of the middle class and different experiences of wealth, right? That middle class actually has changed the dynamics of power quite a bit, in some ways of equalizing uh, uh, more of that power structure. Uh, Marx wrote the Communist Manifesto in order to reach out to the proletariat or to the labor class to inform them about their standing within that economic status and that economic zone that they live in. And his objective was to essentially inform and help at least formulate or get people upset enough that they would no longer, um, live and work within that society to recognize the inequality of it. So you might hear about Marx and communism and stuff like that. A lot of what he was talking about really had to do with the inequality and the difference between the laborer and the owners of those businesses. Then you have Pierre Bourdieu. Pierre kind of examines how education can really have a big influence in social mobility within a community, right? Uh, the idea that the more educated you are, the more opportunity that you're going to have. Um, and this is also really kind of important to understand that education does have a big um, part in your place in society. What's interesting is that um, while that is generally the case, especially when we consider sort of the difference between someone that does not have a high school education versus a high school education, we can see big differences when it comes to economic status. However, we are seeing sort of a shift in um, sort of modern American and Western communities in which you can find a very good job, especially within sort of the you know workplaces, jobs that are focused on like HVAC and plumbing and construction, where you might work that job for 4 or 5 years, get a really good paying job where people that go off to college go through and end up having a lot of debt, still being able to find usually a typically a good job, but not always, and having a different um, sort of economic presence, right? If we go back 50 years, getting your bachelor's was akin to getting a master's or a PhD, um, and you were almost guaranteed to get a great job. That is not the case anymore. Education has changed. So, it's important to sort of look at um, levels of education and the opportunities that are being provided. Uh, Baudou talked a little bit about, um, sort of the difference though that education can provide, and this is absolutely true when it comes to sort of understanding how education can benefit you greatly compared to those that don't get that education. Um, it gives you access to learning and gaining access to people with more resources, with more wealth, more social capital. Um, you might be able to learn multiple languages, have access to more travel than might normally be accessible. And that will definitely give you an advantage over others that don't have that. He also talks about um, this concept called habitus, right? And habitus is really kind of important to understand because uh, it sort of is this process in which we see people existing within their communities based on their level of education and what they are taught to expect, right? So let's say you live in a family that is pretty well to do, right? You've got some wealth, and you are taught from a very early age that no matter what you do, you are going to succeed, right? And you're going to do it. You go to school and you learn all of these things. You get a really good education, and throughout that education, even if you fail, you know that that failure is only going to help you succeed more, right? Because that failure is a lesson, right? That it's a lesson that you have learned and you won't do again. And you are taught that no matter what you're going to do, you're going to succeed. Even if you fall upon hard times, you're going to succeed and pull yourself out of it. And all of a sudden, right, you become successful because you have this concept of habitus. You have been taught from an early age that you will exceed no matter what. That also works towards the poor population. If you grew up in a community in which you're poor and you expect to stay poor, right? You don't see any avenue to get out of that community, to get out of that status of being poor, of being at the lower end of the social status. If you see yourself there and that's what you get, and your education is poor, and your family is poor, and all of a sudden your brain just sits you there and says, no matter what, like I'm never going to get out of this. Um, then it stays there. If you don't see that there's hope, if you're not taught that there is hope, right? All of a sudden there is this um, lack of ability to move forward in an upward way. So habitus is this idea that no matter what, no matter how um, you're born, right? That those early stages, your education, the access to resources that you're given, um, if you are taught that you will succeed, then you will succeed, and that's just sort of how it goes. And that education becomes really important, but it becomes a part of your enculturation and ideals, right? How you move through life. And I think this is a really important thing to consider when you look at different communities, trying to see how they uh, look at their levels of education, look at their access to those resources, and what their hopes and dreams are, can all give you an idea as to where that community is going, right? If they believe that their community has been left behind and it's terrible and there's all these bad things, right? That rarely gives incentive to change, right? Because if you were taught that, or you grew up that way, you see it happen all the time, that hope disappears, and that hope can be a very powerful motivator. So the habitus of a community um, can be, very, very important. Then we have Leith Mullings. Mullings talks about intersectionality, and this is sort of a really important way of combining different aspects of research and recognizing that these different lenses, right? Because what we talk about is this holistic approach to research. Uh, Mullings started to include things like race and gender as main considerations to power and stratification within a community, right? And we include those as well in general, right? How does race, how does ethnicity, um, and how does gender and sexuality all contribute to the use and consideration of power. Um, and this helps us to understand how different communities are going to interact with each other, especially communities that are very diverse. If you go into a community within like Papua New Guinea, from say like the movie that I had you watch, Dead Birds, right? If you look at race and ethnicity, well, everyone is um, pretty much the same. Everybody looks the same. They all have the same heritage, right? You don't have that diversity of race. You might have diversity when it comes to the playings of outside communities, right? And how people are going to react to different people coming from outside that community. But within that community, you're going to have a different set of standards, right? So it's important to understand how each community views, again, ideas like race and gender within their community, and then how they look at other communities outside of their own, and how they are going to interact with them. Okay, we're going to pause there and then get into the next section of this class. We'll come back in just a few.